Welcome to Agents of Revenue, the Revenue Obsessed podcast, where we talk about all things AI agents and all things revenue. I'm your host, David Walker, the co-founder and CEO of Spara. My guest today has worked as a software developer at his own company, as the head of growth at a few companies, and he is now the head of GTM Engineering at Clay, the company that literally invented GTM Engineering. You probably already know him. He's exceptional and definitely revenue obsessed. Welcome, Everett Berry.
Thanks, David. So nice to be here.
So, Everett, I ask everyone this. What does revenue obsessed mean to you?
So I think for me, and this is maybe somewhat specific to Clay, we have a horizontal consumption-based platform. And we know that when we can map a use case that Clay can solve to something that a problem that a customer has, the consumption kind of speaks for itself. And so the trick is that when you can solve like everything, picking the right use case, the biggest one, the one that's most painful is not easy. And so I think for me, revenue obsessed is actually zeroing in on the like 3 or 4 things that are going to get a customer going on our platform with a kind of view to the 10 or 11 things that they could ultimately do. So use case mapping, I guess, would be my answer.
I love it. It's the Mark Zuckerberg 10 friends in 10 days kind of thing. What's the metric that moves the needle and gets people hooked and consuming?
Yeah. So, I'd split Clay into 2 motions here. We have our self-serve motion where folks are signing up for the product, put a credit card in, et cetera. We know that when people sign up, there's kind of like a golden moment in the table in Clay where they create a table or a workflow. They add a waterfall enrichment, which is like getting phone numbers from 10 different people, and they add an AI column, and both of those run successfully. We know that if our self-serve users get to that point, they retain I think it's like 6x better than if they don't get to that point, and they have to do that within 7 days. So that's on the self-serve side. And so a lot of our kind of like lifecycle marketing and activation is based around that. On the enterprise side, our head of CX, Jess Bergson, always was militant about the fact that retention problems begin during onboarding. We try to do is make sure that customers are we try to make sure that 75% of our enterprise customers are pacing towards 100% of their credit spend by the 3-month mark. And so we know as a business that you're always going to have some, unhealthy customers that you can't really expect to have 100% healthy customers. So, but we know broadly across our portfolio, if we hit those marks quarter after quarter, that translates to a certain kind of net dollar retention and a large amount of expansion. And if we don't hit those marks, then we kind of have a problem. So that's how we break it down in terms of kind of the initial golden moments for Clay customers.
I love that. And I bet there are so many GTM leaders out there listening saying, boy, I wish I could know 3 months in if someone was really healthy or not. That sounds amazing to have that kind of data that early.
Yeah, that is the thing about a consumption model is you do get a lot of signal from it. Most Clay customers on the enterprise side, at least, are buying millions of credits and actions, and ideally doing useful work with those, within the 30-day window of them signing. Most enterprises, of course, because Clay involves connecting your CRM, your data warehouse, there can be these kind of elongated cycles of IT approvals and things, even after the contract is signed. But we know that once the kind of data starts flowing, that if the credits and actions are going towards useful, productive work, that we'll tend to see kind of like pipeline or productivity uplifts as a trailing metric from that. And that it means customers have their systems connected, they've got tables that are working, they're in Clay building. So that for us is success. And then of course, failure is something like, some unforeseen security blocker that we didn't catch in the pre-sales motion occurs, and we have to spend like 8 weeks going through some additional review. That especially because Clay is often bought with some time-sensitive, like revenue impacting problem in the way, like some territory carve or low outbound reply rates or something like that. If we're not addressing that problem for the customer, even if it's the customer's own fault in a pretty quick manner, then that is usually not a good start for us. So yeah, the some ability to capture some event stream of, even if your pricing isn't some event stream of activity in your product and to know very quickly, I think has been very, very key for us.
Super powerful. And I'm extremely tempted to just make this an entire podcast about successfully executing consumption-based pricing.
Hard to.
But I'm going to disappoint those listening right now and shift gears. Maybe we'll do another episode on that. So what I really want to do is get super tactical on what you're actually executing on at Clay. And I think that's the best way for other GTM operators and leaders to learn. So tee it up for us, Everett. Give us an overview of a project that you recently executed on, and maybe start with the problem statement that you went to tackle.
Yeah, I think many people kind of picture Clay as probably either data enrichment or some kind of, outbound emailing situation. And for me, though, it has really always been more broad-based infrastructure to kind of do any kind of growth play. And so my favorite thing in the past year or so has been working on channels which are traditionally considered like fairly manual or even like involve the physical world. So for example, I love direct mail, do a whole session there, but the one that has been particularly productive for us in the past year or so has been field marketing, doing events, dinners, summits of various kinds, and so on. And I think what has been interesting for me is there's so many, maybe similar to like an inbound funnel, little areas of optimization that you can begin to kind of land automation in. And Clay has been extraordinarily helpful for this, especially because at any one point, you kind of are dealing with these like little campaigns that you're running. And so, you're trying to get attendees to show up. You're trying to make sure that people that register, you're trying to get invites out and get attendees. Then you're trying to make sure attendees that registered actually show up. Then after the event, you're trying to kind of like get those folks into your pipeline or accelerate maybe some in progress deals. And then at the end, you're trying to kind of create a loop of like, repeating that as much as you can so you don't have all these sort of wacky events on your calendar. So at every stage of that process, I have been like pleasantly surprised with just how much automation can be introduced. And the other thing about events is they're highly creative. They are often the best ones play to some level of like human emotion or interest. So while we like to host dinners and everything, we also have hosted like a hemp joint rolling event in San Francisco, and so there's kind of this element of like shaping the invite, shaping the build up to the event, shaping the follow up, where you can use automation to kind of prepare things for humans, reps, or field marketers, or so on. But then you need to create these feedback loops where, because it's a small volume and it's very one-to-one and personalized in a lot of these cases, that you can get human feedback from the automations back into your systems and kind of execute on that. So it's not this sort of like credit intensive, use case. It's not enriching 1 million records in your CRM and so forth, but it's a very high impact, kind of very fun area, and I've been really pleasantly surprised by how much automation can play a role here.
I love it. Perfect. Throw everyone a curveball, go with events. So, okay, so events are the kind of area, I really like this because it's the kind of area that I think is easy to, not put a KPI on, not think too much about automation. So it's kind of the perfect example. So what was the metric that you're optimizing for when you go and sort of tackle this project?
We're optimizing for a qualified pipeline created from our events, and we have so far been able to achieve an average of about a 10x ratio on that. So if we put like 50K into an event, we are expecting to get 500K of pipeline out. And so you can imagine Sculpt, for example, don't recall if we publicly shared, but let's say it was more than 7 figures of spend that we put into Sculpt, then we're expecting to get 8 figures of pipeline out. And that's on average. Now you are always, just like you have when you're doing outbound campaigns or something else, you're going to have some duds in there. And so you also need to have some like rock star events where it's more like a 15x or a 20x. But I think with the right level of kind of intentionality and setup, and I would also say having a really killer brand is very helpful here. We think a 10x is roughly our target for kind of spend in and pipeline out.
Okay, so there's a whole bunch of marketers and CROs that are listening to this and saying, what the hell, 10x? Are you kidding me? That's not possible. That is amazing. Congratulations. That's huge. So walk us through maybe an example of something that you actioned to increase that metric and get it up to 10x.
Yeah, well, the first place where we were going wrong on this, and my observation helping customers, there's a lot of them go wrong too, is like our standard process for creating event invites. Let's say the events marketing team has already done the sort of like, creative thinking around what we're going to do and whatever. And like, let's just say in theory, we have some kind of dinner event. And speaking of creative thinking, one thing that was effective for us is we've like hired magicians that have come to our dinners and performed for like a while. So let's say we have, our CEO at the dinner and we have 20 seats. Maybe we have CEO and two other Clay employees. We have 20 seats that we can fill. Who actually sits in those seats is not the easiest thing to understand. And the process that we initially followed was like, at Channel, we're hosting a dinner in San Francisco in 2 months. Like, who should we invite?
Yeah. Everyone's done that. Yep.
Yeah. And that right off the bat kind of gets you off on the wrong foot because first of all, that you're now relying on individual reps to kind of nominate their deals. Those individual reps don't actually have a holistic view of what's important in the pipeline to that we need to get this quarter, or that, maybe we're good for this quarter, we need to create pipeline next quarter. So when you are relying on individual people to like nominate customers or prospects, that kind of is an initial problem. Another problem then is you're relying on people to nominate people. A rep is going to get tagged in probably, 20 or 30 things each day in Slack. And this type of thing, because it is usually the event itself is further away in the calendar. And also usually it is focused on earlier stage pipeline generation. For the rep, it's might be 4 or 5 months before they see like something tangible as a result of this. And so on their priority list, it's probably like right near the bottom to do anything. And then the third problem with this is, let's say they actually nominate someone, then you still have a whole string of things that you need to do to actually execute an invite to them and get them excited. If it's a leadership dinner, most likely the rep emailing a leader at the company probably won't be effective, especially if it's very early in the pipe. So you really need to have a leader to leader outreach to do this. You can throw bodies at this problem. I actually think Salesforce is very effective here. When I have been sort of a guest at some of their events, there's like seemingly like 3 or 4 people that are involved in communicating with me about that. And if anyone of the listeners have ever been a VIP at Dreamforce or something, they have experienced this. But a lot of companies don't have the resources that Salesforce would have to execute this. So that's kind of a list of problems. And so the solution initially here is you need to have a golden list. You need to have kind of this real-time updated list of who would we actually staff at this dinner if it occurred in New York or San Francisco or Chicago. And so of course we use Claytable for this. You could do something else, but it is actually a tricky bit of GTM engineering to keep that list really fresh and be able to say, we send these invites out to these let's say 35 people, we're going to get 19 or 20 acceptances. And all the people that accept are going to be people that are going to be helpful for our revenue target and so forth. There's a bunch of like other kind of like more advanced pieces to this too, which is usually at these events, you want to have like customers there too. So how can you actually match relevant customers to the prospects that you invite? For example, you probably don't want like a Fortune 500 CRO sitting next to like a Series A CRO, right? Like those two people have nothing in common, at least on the GTM side, to talk about. They have no really similar problems. So like many things Clay related, there is kind of a data thing to work through here. And then once you have that golden list, actually figuring out who to invite becomes a like centralized problem that your demand gen team can execute, and they can do it with a view of what's actually important for this quarter's number or next quarter's number. So I'll pause there, but this is kind of the first piece.
Yeah, I mean it's one of those, everyone's done that, right? The Slack the local team and say who's got people, which when you phrase it the way that you have is so obviously a fraught tactic, because you're put another way, you're essentially limiting the world of possibilities to who is top of mind for some subset of humans internally, right? And so we're going to have selection bias, we're going to have all the challenges that you mentioned,
right?
Versus thinking a much harder thing to do is who do we actually want there in a vacuum? And that's a hard problem to solve. But that's a great example of one of the things that I find so fascinating right now about where we are in the adoption cycle, is that most people haven't thought about what's possible, particularly as you get into narrower, if you're talking about converting website traffic, right? Like that's a known, understood problem space, right? Spara does that, other companies do that. But if you're thinking about event attendance, that's just so far off the list, but with a relatively simple set of tools, but most importantly, a mindset, which is, okay, the world's totally changed. access we have to data and the access we have to agents to be able to go execute on things is radically different than it was 18 months ago. How would I rebuild this from scratch? And of course, you'd come up with something in the realm of the solution that you outlined, right? Which is what's the perfect set of 20 people, unrelated to who we would ever think of. I love that. Okay, so I know we're going to skip some of the steps, but you get the 20 people. They come to that dinner. How do you, and I know you do this very well because you and I were the two keynote speakers at an event, and I got hunted down afterwards by Everett. And we were texting about something else on the side, so I'm pretty sure it wasn't you. So how do you then go from event attendance to 10x ROI, right? That's the next major step of the funnel.
Yeah. So if I could insert like one pre-step here, you have your kind of like invite list. Then you need to execute these invites. And we always try to do that on behalf of the kind of highest level leader that's going to be there, with the rep following up with lower level folks in the org to say, hey, by the way, let's say my champion is Fred, and he is like the VP of RevOps, and Marie is the CRO. And so the rep should talk to Fred about the fact that Varun, Clay's COO, is going to be hosting this event, that Marie, the prospect CRO, should be attending. Meanwhile, Varun should also be emailing or LinkedIn messaging or even texting in some cases, Marie, to invite her. And certainly on the LinkedIn and email side, this can be orchestrated. So again, the events team can just send these on behalf of the exec. Or in other setups, you can have the execs EA activate these as well. And so there's like some details to figure out there. And then the most classic thing with tech events, particularly dinners, is it's like, oh my God, we have 20 confirmed attendees, like we're good. And then the day of, it like rains in New York and 6 people don't show up. And so right there, you actually have lost your chance to get to a 10x multiple, because there's just no way you can make that up now with 20 or 30% of your attendees missing. And so after the invite goes out and the acceptance comes in, then in the days leading up to, there's a series of confirmations, see you there, looking forward to it, where in many cases you will get people that drop out, and then you can go back to your invite list and sort of fill those spots. So
find the family emergency 48 hours in advance instead of 1 hour in advance.
Family emergency. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, so then in the actual lead up to the event itself, the day of hosting the event, this is something I learned from Varun. He is absolutely obsessed with seating charts. I would always attend these events with him where we would show up 15 minutes early, and he would go around and he would rearrange everybody in the room. And he would be like, this person needs to sit next to this person. And he would be like, who made the seating chart, et cetera. But of course, like, he has incredible context on, especially on the leadership level, on a bunch of deals that, even like our, myself or our events team doesn't have. So then what we built is I actually have a LinkedIn post about this, a little web app that has a like seating chart builder that allows leadership at Clay to kind of rearrange people and sort of like set that in stone, so that then when the event team shows up to prepare for the event, they can kind of like put all the seating at the right places. And then that particular seating chart is key, because then the events team and the demand gen team knows what Clay person sat at the table with what key prospects, and they can mine that person after the event for context on what the conversation is. Because the sort of like last major piece where this falls apart is you have an amazing dinner. People are like, wow, this is great. Like, can't wait to work with you guys. And then almost invariably there's like hiccups in the actual follow-up process, and the opportunity doesn't actually progress, or the pipeline doesn't get registered. And so there's a series of automations that kick off afterwards, where whatever Clay person, like let's say it was me sitting at a table with 3 prospects and 2 customers, I get hounded for information on what the discussion was like, so I can give that to the rep whose account belongs to those, or whose prospects, who owns the prospects that were sitting at my table. And I have to kind of like act on that, and the rep knows it was me and all of that. And so yeah, there's I think, in my opinion, like that is like been a real unlock for us in terms of executing these events, looking at just each phase of it, where basically pipeline falls out of your funnel, from invites to registrants, to actual attendance, to follow up after the event, and adding just automation for those kind of like human kinks that occur that usually result in an event. Okay, we spent, $50K for an event and we registered like 2 opportunities for $300K. And given that those opportunities may not close, one of them probably won't close. You sort of look at that and you start to have like questions about the ROI that you're putting into these things. So elongated answer, but some more details on how we handle this.
I love that. That's awesome. One of the things we've been doing for events that has been really successful as well is we send a follow-up email to everyone who is there, and we specifically list out key talking points. I'm sure,
I like
sure
that
you do this too, right? Right. That people in the room said, and put everyone together in an email chain. And we've had events that have almost become these sort of like collegial moments, right? Where people reply all, and then we find out that there's long friendships and customer relationships and all that kind of stuff. But I've always found it's really fascinating because if you do the follow-up well, by getting 20 smart people in a room together and being the host, you can sort of almost position yourself as absorbing, let's call it, some of the credit for the intelligence of the room, right? And people remember, oh, I learned that thing at that Spara event, or I learned that thing at that Clay event from this person, and have that sort of ecosystem with the attendees themselves.
Yeah, that's super underappreciated. I have to say, like, I'm constantly kind of mining our customers and prospects for ideas, and these events are always super dense with that. And that's also, that same effect is why it's super critical to sit people that have something that is probably shared between them in a business context together. And that's why we do enrich everybody and do the seating charts so that, you are not sitting people at wildly different stages of companies, maybe wildly different stages of careers, et cetera. Of course, like, it's amazing if there's a spontaneous connection that is made, but in all likelihood, two private equity backed CROs in the healthcare space have a lot more to talk about than if one of them was sitting next to a Series B founder and a consumer company, right? So I completely agree that, like, doing things to develop a shared context among the attendees is one of the best ways to sort of like lock in a memory of what happened, and then for that attendee to associate positive vibes with that company, attend future events, and do business with you.
Yeah, totally. So one of the I'll give you a sort of future event thing we're working on right now, particularly as everybody gets ready for a big part of the B2B conference season.
Yes, that's right. It's coming up
is so we have Spara powers conversational agents, and so we typically, our customers use them to talk to their prospects and customers, but we're using them also for event follow-up. And so what we're doing right now is we're training an agent with context around the dinner or the conference, and then being able to text people, and they can actually interact agentically with one of Spara's agents, but it has context of that event or conference. And so, if it's at a conference, it can ask something like, hey, did you catch this talk this morning, right? And sort of chat back and forth. Or if it's after dinner, you can ask it, hey, who had that thing about commission structures? Who was talking about commission structures? And it'll have answers. So we're playing with how to do sort of, I guess, bringing people from event to product experience.
Yeah, that's
in a way that feels very seamless and actually value add.
That's absolutely fantastic. I also think that, like, what you're doing here is you're sort of meeting an exec where they are and where they live, which is on their phone. And so, for example, like, we had some experiences where we sent the follow-up email, it displayed well on desktop, but like it looked crazy on a phone, right? And so, especially if you're doing leadership style events, understanding that those folks, might be thinking about your business or interacting with you in the like 3 minutes between meetings in a back-to-back day, and then trying to hit them at the right time. For example, like, if I was building that agent inside your company, right, I would not be, texting West Coast people on East Coast time. I would be thinking about, evening commutes, morning commutes, lunchtime, things like that. I sometimes I personally make the mistake of like posting something at like 4 p.m. Eastern on LinkedIn. Like, no one's going to look at that, right? Everyone's kind of in their last meeting of the day. So, or in their first meeting of the afternoon Pacific, or they're asleep in in Europe, right? So doing the kind of follow-ups in a personalized, context-driven way, and then really making sure that the events team kind of understand what's it like in the day of a life of an exec. That is like a sure way to kind of increase your your pipeline rates per se from these things.
Yeah, and it's and I know I've been to Clay events, and and you've been to some of our events. Like, you don't want to actually pitch your product at your events,
Right.
right? That's sort of the one thing you don't do, right? You let the room pitch problem statements, and you have a perspective on solutions that likely aligns to your product, given that's we live in it all day long.
Yeah.
But tying the loop between that experience and then experiencing your product and making that as seamless as possible, I think is super interesting, because great products pitch themselves. And, you don't have to actually pitch your product. You just have to align at the level of sort of, hey, we're solving interesting GTM problems. We think about the world similarly. We have an ecosystem of people who think about the world similarly, right? And I would argue that Clay has done this better than anyone, right? I mean, that's the GTM engineer, and building that sort of community, I think it's been really, really successful for you guys. So Everett, 10x ROI is incredible. Take us back to the days of, the Slack message, hey, who knows somebody who wants to go to this dinner? What do you think that metric was back then?
Well, I know what it was. And
if you're comfortable sharing.
We were seeing like 2x, but that for events is actually like a little painful. Like I said, because the pipeline that we're talking about here is ultimately going to it's going to enter its own funnel, where it's going to like some of it won't convert just naturally.
Yep.
So because these events are, and by the way, you can do events for things that are like later stage in the funnel. That's a whole other technique of people that are like, going to buy modulo some terrible thing that happens. That can be useful as well, especially if you're setting up an expansion. But mostly what we're focused on is pretty early stage pipeline. And so whatever, stage 2 to close 1 conversion metrics you see in your funnel, the pipeline that's created from your event is also going to experience that. And so if you just look at a 2x or 3x or 4x event to pipeline created metric, you might say that's good, but then you might end up saying, okay, we actually are spending as much money as we're making on these events. And so we were in that position, and there were things that we wanted to do where we didn't feel comfortable that if we spend X or Y amount of money, we were actually gonna make it back. And so we knew that we had to kind of refine how we were approaching this, and we did, and we feel really good about that now. And I think now there's actually no question of investing in different events, because we know we have.
Yep. Oh, that's awesome. I mean, from 2 to 10x, that's the headline of the blog right there.
There you go.
That's very, very exciting. And thank you for sharing actionable ideas that people can execute themselves. Really helpful. So now I want to shift gears and look forward a little bit. Just generally, what are you excited about over the next couple of years?
Yeah. So the main thing that I think is coming here are these like one-to-one agents. So Clay has been talking a little bit about these account agents. They're kind of like a next best action agent that they're interesting to build, because my own opinion is that just this year is really the time when we have gotten to the point on the reasoning capabilities of the models, as well as the amount of context they can digest and understand, where you can do longer running things. And so, for example, I think I always look to software engineers as the kind of cutting edge practitioners of using LLMs. Software engineers today are able to build these kind of software factories or loops, which produce entire feature sets or code bases over a long period of time. Now, there's certain limitations there. There's this debate and discussion about that, but the takeaway I have from that is that models can now interpret a lot of context over a long period of time. But still, in the coding use case, it's 12 hours or 16 hours at a time that the model is running. The trick with GTM is kind of two things. One is the context needs to be updated and take place over, in many cases, like months or sometimes years, especially if you're talking about something like an account agent. Clay for sure has accounts in our CRM that have, 3 years of history, which is really about the time that we've started selling enterprise contracts. And so the agent has to kind of be able to look across that history and make the best decision. And it's tricky because you can have a customer communication from 2 years ago saying, hey, we're not going to buy because we don't have this feature. And then you can launch that feature a year later. And if the agent isn't able to understand that feature is now available, I'm also expecting there to be rep agents, which kind of sit with a rep and in many cases, like help them operate their day. And one example I have here is like, I would always be getting asked questions like, hey, what's the status of this deal? In theory, what should happen is like a sales leader can ask their agent that, their agent can ask the rep's agent that, and the agent can handle these sort of like intercompany communication to, take the right step. And Claude Tag is kind of an org-wide agent that sort of operates like that. But what I'm expecting is for there to be long-running agents that just exist and talk to each other that are assigned to individual employees of a company. And then what I think is potentially possible, although my thought today is that it's probably way too expensive, is that you actually just have an agent that sort of, I hope this doesn't creep people out, like monitors individual prospects and contacts over the life cycle of us kind of having them in the funnel, and or maybe longer. And so, for example, if a prospect changes companies or something, but they're still a champion, maybe the agent actually continues with them, and then instead of talking to the previous account agent at the previous account, it now interfaces with the new account agent at the new account. So all of that is incredibly exciting. It's also, for at least for us at Clay, and I think for you guys and many of the GTM tools, a real opportunity, because context engineering is not a solved problem. It's the hardest, maybe one of the hardest things today. It's not something that the labs have made. Well, I should be careful here, but basically the idea of a 1 million context window in practice isn't really true. You maybe get like 100K tokens out of it. So you have to be very precise about what you insert into that window. And so agent engineering, loop engineering, context engineering, these are all things that I'm extremely excited about. And then, obviously at Clay, we think we have, great infrastructure to support some of that. But there's just so many problems here to solve. Obviously, you guys are solving a lot of this on the conversational side, which is a whole other set of problems. So that's in general what I'm thinking about right now.
Cool. What are you pessimistic about or nervous about?
I really am not sure about vibe coded like production systems. If I was like a RevOps leader and someone told me, hey, we've rebuilt our inbound flow with like some vibe coded thing, I would be very suspicious. I do think engineers, even if the code is written by an AI, engineers, actual software engineers, still should be the ones overseeing it. And there's many reasons why most go-to-market teams don't have actual software engineers, and they have more ops folks. So I'm a little bit pessimistic about the idea that non-engineers will kind of successfully use vibe coding tools to build like production backend systems. I do think UIs are an exception to this. I am seeing a ton of amazing things that are, amazing UIs that non-engineers create. But even there, I would not call most of what I've seen like production apps. I would call them kind of like slide decks, is an awesome one, like kind of throwaway things, like short-lived things. So I'm a little bit pessimistic about like vibe coded production systems, basically.
Yeah, I think that's one of the more interesting unsolved problems is there seems to be this arc for every, call it RevOpsy type leader that I talk to, which is, hey, we started using Claude Code. Our whole team started using Claude Code. We let ICs in different functional areas start using Claude Code. We built a ton of stuff. Then we realized that there's actually a challenge of knowing what the source of truth is, where this lives, where it's maintained, and we've actually brought it back in. And then you get into public companies where there's, governance and security and all the, a whole nother set of challenges. And it feels like we're at this interesting place where that's a problem. I take the sort of, how would I say this? I take the approach that the concept of non-engineers engineering is going to accelerate, not decrease, but the infrastructure to support that and the areas where that's effective haven't played out yet and haven't developed. Right. And the current status quo is not going to be remotely close to what it looks like a year from now.
Right. Yeah. Like, call me a shill, but I would never vibe code an orchestration layer. Basically. And this is kind of the approach that we're taking with Clay's new API is you can modify Clay's UI from Claude Code, and it's actually an incredible experience. It's the number one way I've been using Clay lately, but the actual like linkages of the nodes and the orchestration flow are managed by Clay, and there's constraints that Clay and our engineering team has put in place that you can't just like do something crazy with. So yeah. So I think I've had the same experience with you where there was like an initial wave and then kind of a pullback, and we'll see how things develop. Of course, I do think the models will just become more capable as well. So they will probably be able to figure out some of these bits, but still, even with Fable and GPT 5.6, the like correct decision making is definitely needs to be done by GTM engineers or actual software engineers.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. Everett, thank you so much for joining. Really a pleasure to speak with you, and we'll talk again soon.
You're welcome, David. This was great. Thank you.